Hey everyone, I'm William Strife and welcome to the Heads Up Podcast, Episode 6, for May 5th, 2012. Alright, now in the natural order of things, first I'll say that a new episode of Elements of Play is up over on Machinima. The subject for this week's video is video game sequels, so go ahead and check it out if you want. Like normal, there's a video annotation below and a link in the description. Well, this week it seems that there's a host of subjects for me to cover before I even get to questions. Last week I posed a general question about whether or not I should do Let's Plays, and after receiving such a resounding positive response, it's more or less official now. I will do Let's Plays, so I'll fork over a few details on the subject of what I'll do and how I'll do it and everything. First of all, the Let's Plays will be sparse. I'm not going to release them every week, it'll only be every once in a while, and even then I intend to generally stick with the format that I used for the Oblivion Let's Plays, which is, 3, maybe 5 episodes, each one will be an hour long. And I received a few comments suggesting that I make the LP short, but there's a very particular reason why I want to stick with the longer ones. First of all, overloading people with a lot of videos for an LP isn't exactly the best thing. For some LPs I've seen up in the triple digits, it's absolutely ridiculous. And since I'm talking about doing 1-hour episodes to start with, and doing a maximum of 5 episodes, you do the math, that's around 25 smaller videos, and I just don't see that being a good choice to make. Additionally, as far as the games go that I would cover, most of you will probably be disappointed to hear this from me, but Skyrim isn't going to be one of the games I'll cover, at least not anytime soon. Whenever I play Skyrim, I feel like it's just my experience, and there's no explicit reason for me to share that with everyone. You can call me selfish if you want, but the fact of the matter is, I just don't want to LP Skyrim, and I might do it later down the line, but I don't know if I actually will. While I'm on the subject of Skyrim, I might as well bring up this subject that came to light last week whenever I published my top 10 list of games. A lot of you are wondering why Skyrim wasn't on the top 10 list, and someone actually sort of tried to call me out for having said in episode 3 that Skyrim is better than Oblivion, and then Oblivion makes my top 10 list, but Skyrim doesn't. First of all, that's completely misconstrued. It's entirely false. I do not think that Skyrim is a better game than Oblivion. I think that Skyrim is an improved game over Oblivion. And what you need to distinguish there is the fact that I think that Skyrim plays a lot smoother, I think it has much fewer technical flaws, but I do not find it to be a better game than Oblivion because it ended up trading far too many things off to be more streamlined. And that is really the specific reason why Skyrim doesn't end up on my top 10 list. I look at it and say, yeah, playing an incredible amount of it right now, but will I really have the interest and the drive to pick it up, a couple of years down the line? That's another reason why it didn't make my top 10 list. I mean, if you look at the games that I mentioned last week, none of them were any more than... I think the newest game on there was 2-3 years old. I think it was Fallout 3 that was the newest that made the actual top 10 list. And basically, they were all games that were not recent, and yet I still wanted to go back and play them. And that was really the qualifying factor. And by that right, Skyrim is just far too new to have ended up on the list. That being said, I just didn't feel like it deserved to be on the list. In my personal opinion, and that's the way I feel, okay? That's the way I feel, and keep in mind that whenever I say I feel like that, in this specific instance, it means I'm not trying to reason it out. That's just my gut feeling, the way that I feel about the game. It's not as good as Oblivion. I'm certain that many of you have a contrasting opinion to me on the subject, but it's not going to change how I look at the matter. So, moving forward, and staying on the subject of Skyrim, most of you probably already know this. For those of you who don't, this is some good news. It turns out that Bethesda has finally announced the first downloadable content for Skyrim, and it's called Dawnguard. Beyond that, there's nothing official on the subject. I can, however, give some insight into the matter. Whether or not any of what I say is going to be authentically true is another story. These are just things that I more or less feel based on logic and gut feeling. Let's start off with the facts. First, Bethesda has announced the downloadable content. Second, Bethesda agreed to an exclusive contract with Microsoft, meaning that Dawn Guard, the new DLC, will be an Xbox exclusive for 30 days after it's released. How long it'll take after those 30 days to pop up on PC or PS3, your guess is as good as mine. Next is, along with the announcement, Bethesda posted a picture of the Dovahkiin with the title Dawn Guard on it. And in this particular image, the Dovahkiin has glowing red eyes. And there are a lot of things that might speak to, but I'll get back to that in a second. Now, the final fact is some interesting information that was fished out of the latest patch 1.5.26 of Skyrim. And there's actually information in there that references content that is not currently present. More specifically, there's code that refers to a, quote, snow elf prince. In addition, the coding references special vampire animation files that don't exist yet, and furthermore, the code is not implemented. And just to add some flavor, there was also information in the patch that would lead many to believe that crossbows are somehow going to be implemented in the game. Whether or not any of this actually means anything is another story, but the fact is, things can be snuck in through patches very subtly to modify the code before any actual substantial content goes in. So those are all of the facts. Bethesda announced it, Dovahkiin has glowing red eyes in the teaser picture, and all of that data that was applied in the latest patch, which seems to indicate that there's interesting content coming on the horizon. Now, granted, this is where just my predictions come in. Nothing that I say from here on out is actually authentic truth. The title Dawn Guard within itself seems to be something significant. My guess is that the Dawn Guard DLC somehow involves vampires, and most likely, in my personal opinion, it's going to involve vampire clans. Now, I am led to this conclusion for more than one reason. First of all, the image of the Dovahkiin with glowing eyes. Even though vampires don't have glowing eyes in Skyrim, and my second playthrough of the game that I'm going through right now actually, I am playing strictly as a vampire, and I can guarantee that your eyes don't glow as a vampire. However, they are still red, and vampires, even though it's not really easy to tell in Skyrim, your eyes do turn red. Second of all is the actual title, Dawn Guard. Now, this title may not leap out at some of you, but first and most obvious, the word dawn is an implication of sunlight. And we all know that vampires do not like daylight and the sun and everything. And second of all, the word dawn is part of the quest Rising at Dawn. And that quest is specifically what you have to go through to cure yourself of being a vampire. Now, whenever you combine the two words, Dawn Guard, for the entire DLC, it leads me to believe that it has something to do with vampires fighting against some order or trying to defend against themselves whenever the daybreak comes. It's kind of an intangible concept that I have going, but the entire idea is that if the dawn is so important to curing vampirism, then why wouldn't vampires somehow be involved if the title itself is Dawn Guard? Maybe I'm just breaching a gap that's a little bit too large, but it's up to you whether or not you want to believe me or think that I'm headed in the right direction at all. And finally, the reason why I think that this conclusion that I've come to is somewhat on target is the fact that there's information in the latest patch that references new vampire moves and animations that are not yet actually in the game. Take that as you will, but that's just my personal outlook on the subject of what Dawn Guard could possibly be about. Granted, none of us will actually know what Dawn Guard is until E3 rolls around early June. Okay, there's one last thing to cover as far as the Elder Scrolls goes this week. Just this past Thursday, Bethesda finally made an official announcement of the Elder Scrolls Online, a massive multiplayer online RPG set to take place sometime between the years 4 and 600 of the Second Era. In this particular game, the Imperial throne sits empty, and as a result, there's a war that breaks out over who should ascend to the throne. Something worth note is that this happens before Tiber Septim, or Talos, ends up becoming Emperor and unites the entirety of Tamriel underneath the Imperial banner. Molag Bal is trying to somehow control the human plane where Tamriel exists, better known as Nirn, the planet where the Elder Scrolls takes place. Now, those are all of the facts about the game, a general idea about when it takes place, and the political and social climate of the time. Now, as far as my personal opinions go, I'm a little bit skeptical about the Elder Scrolls Online because, I'll be quite frank, I watched World of Warcraft basically ruin everything that I liked about the Warcraft series whenever it got incredibly popular. And obviously this new Elder Scrolls game is aimed at trying to dethrone World of Warcraft, and if it should succeed in doing so, or even just end up becoming major competition for World of Warcraft, then I really don't hold any hope for the Elder Scrolls in the long run. It's probably going to end up losing more of its identity to become more accessible, and I already have enough convictions as to how they simplified and dumbed down the entirety of Skyrim in order to appeal to a larger audience. But that's just my personal opinion, and I know that plenty of you are probably going to disagree with me on that fact, though I'm hopeful that plenty of you agree with me on this fact as well. Nonetheless, the Elder Scrolls Online is a game that I will more than likely end up playing just because it's Elder Scrolls, even if I don't end up liking it. Alright, now to move on to another subject that's unrelated to the Elder Scrolls. This subject more or less pertains to the fact that a lot of people noticed last week that whenever I published my top 10 list, that my favorite developer was Rockstar Games, and yet none of their games ended up on the top 10 list. And there's a very logical reason for why that happened. Rockstar Games, they publish pretty much nothing but titles that I have a whole lot of fun playing through the first time, but I have no interest in going back to play again. I don't know why that is, but for some reason their games just have a single playthrough appeal to me, and I'm never very compelled to go back and experience the game again. You know, Grand Theft Auto 3, Vice City, San Andreas, GTA 4, Red Dead Redemption, LA Noire, and the upcoming Max Payne. They're all great games within their own right, but for some reason I just never want to go back and play them again. And because my top 10 list is centered around titles that I will drop everything to go back and play again, that just translates into Rockstar Games being titles that don't make the list for the sheer fact that I never really feel compelled to go back and play them again. Why that is, I can't really answer you, it's just the way things are. On the note of Grand Theft Auto though, I think I'll move on to my first question this week, and it's from the Yamamoto 007, who asks, talking about Grand Theft Auto, you said San Andreas wasn't quite your cup of tea. Why? Why San Andreas out of them all? Whenever I was playing Grand Theft Auto games before San Andreas, I got my start on Grand Theft Auto with Grand Theft Auto 2 back on the PlayStation 1. And then I subsequently played Grand Theft Auto 3 and Vice City. And the big thing about those games is Grand Theft Auto looked very cartoony. I mean, yes, it was a mature game, constructed in a mature manner, and was presented in a mature light. However, the visuals themselves had a lot of color, so much color that they kind of popped, and as a result, they felt more cartoony. Whenever I played San Andreas, which is a game that I bought the day it came out, the developers over at Rockstar North, they really improved the shaders, they improved the look of the game, they improved things so much over the previous Grand Theft Auto titles that I really felt like there was a level of realism that was reached that wasn't there in the first two PlayStation 2 installments. And as a result, I kind of felt discomforted by shooting people and running around in the game. I mean, nowadays I've very much so gotten past that point. Whenever I was playing San Andreas on the PlayStation 2, I wasn't really playing any first-person shooters, and there was a severe lack of realism in most of the games that I was playing. The closest that it ever got for me were the Silent Hill games on the PlayStation 2. But more to the fact, it's how San Andreas was the first game that I played where I really got that feeling of, wow, this feels a lot more real than I expected it to, and it was just based on the visuals alone that I got that feeling, and as a result, I finished the game, and unlike with the previous titles, I completed the final mission, and I was like, okay, it's over. I've seen the ending, I don't want to play this anymore. And, you can criticize me for that or say that I'm whatever, but that's just how I felt. But don't misinterpret how I feel. I still think that San Andreas is one of the best Grand Theft Auto games they released. Not my favorite. Vice City certainly trumps what they did in San Andreas in my opinion, just for the humor and the world and existence and whatnot, but I'm not bashing San Andreas, I'm just saying it's just not my favorite because of the initial reaction I had to it. This next question comes from user Made by Shady, who asks, would you ever lend your voice to Machinima creators? I guess. I mean, it's not like I'm a voice actor first and foremost, but as most of you have probably noticed by now, I can squeeze out different types of accents and voices. But yeah, I think I'd be willing to lend my voice out to Machinima. Granted, if my inbox ends up swamped, then it's purely a scenario of my personal discretion what I want to apply myself to, and moreover, whether or not the individual who's looking to scout me or wants my voice in whatever, whether or not it's actually worth my time to put my voice into their production. Because let's face it, my voice is kind of a large selling point for me, and I really don't want it to end up being misused or put in a bad production or anything like that. That being said, if anybody with a production of decent level quality comes along and says, hey, will you come along and, do a voice or do a narration or play this character in my video, then I don't see a reason why I wouldn't. And on that exact same note, if an indie developer came along and said, hey, we want your voice in our game, I'd be happy to help them out. Granted, it would still be subject to the same scrutiny. Would the game be worthwhile? Is it really something that I want my voice to be in? Because naturally there are certain roles that I would want to stay away from. But the short of your answer, yeah, I wouldn't have a problem lending my voice out to Machinima creators, or any other creators for that matter. Okay, this question pertains to something that I brought up last week, and it's from Mr. BarrelRoll42. He asks, what is the incident with GameSpot that was mentioned? Now, just to refresh everyone's memory, last week whenever I was bringing up my top 10 list, I was talking about The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. And I quoted GameSpot, the review site, for what they said about the game. And before I said the quote, I said, this is what the old GameSpot said, not the new GameSpot after the Kane and Lynch incident. Now, the Kane and Lynch incident refers to something that happened back in 2007. There was a game called Kane and Lynch Dead Men that was released on the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, and the company, IDOS Interactive, that made the game had purchased gross amounts of advertising space on GameSpot. Now, you need to realize that up until this point in time, GameSpot was the go-to resource for reviews and whatnot. They were the big premier place. They were the heavyweight whenever it came to video game journalism. And then Kane and Lynch came out and they had all of this advertising all over their website. And the specific reviewer who was tasked with reviewing Kane and Lynch, a man named Jeff Gertzman, gave it a lukewarm score. More specifically, he gave it like a 6 out of 10. And obviously that's not a really great review. What ended up happening was he was dismissed. Now, naturally, you can kind of connect the dots here. Company buys a whole bunch of advertising space for a specific game gets bad review, guy who reviewed game gets fired. Well, obviously, a lot of people connected these dots, and at that point in time, Dig was the really big way for information to go viral on the web. It just lit up the gaming communities, and very quickly GameSpot was accused of selling out. Now, naturally, this was enormously bad for GameSpot's image, and some of the fallout involved a bunch of people deciding to boycott GameSpot, just to stop going there altogether. And I don't have any tangible proof of this specific statement here, but it was at this time that the review site GameTrailers.com seemed to really rise up to the top of the pile. So if you didn't really know who Game Trailers was before 2007, or you only really got to know who they were at around 2007, I think there's a pretty good chance that that was a result or a repercussion of the fallout from the Kane and Lynch controversy that happened over at GameSpot. Now, granted, GameSpot completely denied that any of this was true, but I mean, it's kind of hard not to say that something happened there whenever those three individual things were so closely linked. The extreme amount of advertising that IDOS had purchased, followed by the bad review, and then the reviewer's dismissal. And today, Jeff Gertzman, the man who reviewed Kane and Lynch, he went on to found his own gaming site called Giant Bomb, which is fairly successful today. But getting back to the point, the reason why I brought up GameSpot and said the old GameSpot is because back whenever they reviewed The Legend of Zelda: The Ocarina of Time, it was still a fairly small group. Granted, they were one of the larger and better review sites to go to, but it was long before they were doing video reviews or anything like that, and it was purely text, and up until fairly recently, actually, just within this console generation, they only ever gave 4 games a top 10 rating, and The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time was one of them. But that's the story behind the GameSpot Kane and Lynch controversy. Okay, now I will move on to the comments that got the most upvotes this past week, overlooking the comments that said it's a great idea to do a Let's Play. Thanks for all of those, by the way. This question comes from... oh, geez, you know, even whenever I look at that with leet speech, I don't really know how to... I have no earthly idea what it is. I think it's just a random mash of letters and numbers. P1H9I812. If that's supposed to be said some other way, you've definitely lost me. But this individual asks, what's your opinion about the Souls games, Demon Souls and Dark Souls? Hard. 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 Very, very difficult is all I have to say. Personally, I haven't actually played Dark Souls because I haven't had time on my hands to do so, even though I do have it. But as far as Demon's Souls go, that game consumed an incredible amount of time, even though I didn't end up beating it. I actually got down to the last level and just said, you know what, I just don't care anymore, and I stopped playing. After all of the time that I spent grinding, trying to get up to a high enough level to have an easy enough time to beat all of the bosses and complete the game with some fair amount of ease. But simply put, I think that Demon Souls and presumably Dark Souls, I'm making the assumption that it's just as difficult as Demon Souls, they are definitely special games for special people, because you really have to be of a certain... you have to be a gamer of a certain breed to sit through those games, and the way that they punish you, and they just ask so much out of you for so long. You can't screw up, you can barely take any hits. The games, you know, they really center around the concept of you have to rely on your skill, and if you do not have the skill, you are not going to succeed. And there's a lot of value to that, but at the same time, it's not exactly the type of game that I want to be playing all the time. That being said, I had tons and tons and tons of fun playing Demon Souls, even though it kicked my butt time and time and time again. Okay, this question comes from user Stewie is the Lord. Family Guy, anyone? Who asks, how do you feel about dancing? Okay, I want to get something straight. The only reason why I'm answering this question is because it got such an incredible number of upvotes, and my response is, I can moonwalk, but I don't think that that really counts as dancing. Anything beyond that, and you better not be expecting much. Moving on. Alright, this will be the last question for this podcast, which comes from Opened Discussion. My question is, why? Why do you go through all the trouble to put up these videos for us all by yourself without physical reward? What keeps you motivated? I'm not entirely certain what keeps me motivated. I do want to become successful in the video game journalism field to some extent, in some manner at some point, and I think that doing this is a really good way for me to build my skills, but at the exact same time, I do it because I really do love games, and I really do love creating stuff. And, you know, there's a certain level of romancing with the concept of other people know who you are, and they actually care about what you have to say, that, you know, that fame and ego thing that goes on. Not that that's the major thing, because if it was, I certainly wouldn't still be doing this. I don't get anywhere near enough recognition as some of you probably think I do. But above everything else, it's the fact that I really do enjoy making videos, and I think that putting quality content together and putting it out there, so many of you enjoy listening to my opinions and hearing, you know, facts put together in an informative manner. That really appeals to me, and the fact that I feel like I'm appreciated in some way, shape, or form whenever I do this stuff, whenever, you know, it's not necessarily rocket science to me, I just find it something interesting. It's something interesting to me. I read the facts, I connect the dots, and I basically bridge the gaps and figure out what's going on. And I really enjoy that because it's a puzzle or detective type endeavor, and if people enjoy listening to the information that I come up with, so much the better. But of course, everything that drives it right at the base is the fact that I love games, and hey, why not turn my passion into something that can actually benefit me in the long run? Well, that's everything for this week. Be certain to hit the comments below and ask questions or bring up topics that you want me to cover, and don't forget to upvote other people's questions or topics that you think should be brought up as well. Until next week, I'm William Strife, and I'll see you later.